I've met many clients along the way who are under the idea that something can be done, but have a rude awakening if something goes wrong. When nothing goes wrong, it's fine, right?
I've always been curious as well. Like,
Mhm.
you're so caught up in trying to get a house, and then you kind of tend to forget what happens after you get a house. And in terms of like maintaining your house and your repayments, what if in the event something might happen to me? If I'm the head of the household, touch wood, if anything happen and I pass away, what happens to that servicing repayment? Yeah.
So I think the first point that one needs to look at is the insurance, right? So there are mortgage reducing term assurance type policies, meaning if something happened to the owner, whether the loan is covered. Unfortunately, we've had cases where in the past we had this client, one case in particular, the client had bought a house, and that was when I was working in a bank, and we were following up and to make sure, just to remind the customer, right, that please look at it before you proceed anything. You commit to a 2 over million house. At that point in time, 2 over million was a lot of money. Still is a lot of money, but at that point was even more so, right? He basically kept saying that he wanted to look at it, but one day we found out that something happened to him, and he unfortunately passed on. So that was very sad. And what happened was that the wife was a homemaker.
Wow.
Yeah. So unfortunately, they had to sell the property, and because they simply could not maintain the loan. So yeah, I mean, insurance is one thing. The other thing is this, right? I think it's also very important to understand how you hold the property. And let me explain to you. When we buy a HDB flat, it's less troublesome. Buy HDB flat because HDB has rules to say that you must have a family nucleus to purchase the property. And properties under HDB are held under what we call joint tenancy. Meaning if A and B, being a couple, a married couple, buy a property, if something happens to A, title passes to B immediately. So that is one thing. This is on top of the servicing of loan, the insurability, and so on and so forth. I'm talking about something important and one should consider. So for HDB, generally it's quite okay. People assume that is all right, right? Yeah. I think in private property, there's another consideration. It's called tenancy in common. So for example, if I buy a property with you, and this is a investment, right? We have put in separate monies. Obviously, if something happens to me, I would not like the property to transfer to you, right? So we must be able to control that aspect, and say that, okay, if something happens to me, I must be able to will that portion to somebody else.
And that means you get to have full control of that portion of your amount. Okay.
Yeah.
I actually have an interesting example to share with you. Like, this is more for HDB. So my parents actually, I don't know whether they had the joint tenancy situation, because according to my dad, if anything would have happened to him in my previous house, the HDB flat would have been fully paid for. But then my late mom actually passed away. So because of that, nothing happened, because he was technically the occupier. Main occupier, she's the co-occupant or something like that.
Right.
Yeah. So if something happened to him, then we will be taken care of. So what is that situation?
Right. So these are rules that the HDB has. I think it was put that your dad was the owner, or the lessee. The lessor is HDB, and the main occupant is your mother, right? Which means, being the owner, if something happened to him, the loan will have been settled. But because your mother was the occupier, not deemed as the lessee, So there are rules around that, and it gets a bit complicated when we talk about it. But I think it's important to understand. Not a discussion now, but I will run through with you separately. Maybe it's a content for another video, but it's important to understand that scenario. Now, I wanted to also add the point about the if in case you buy a private property, right? If you buy a private property and put it under joint tenancy, we've always said in banking in the past that if there's joint tenancy in a private property, something happens to party A, title will shift to party B.
Yeah.
Right? Now, recently there's something very interesting happened, right? The father and son bought a property, and it's a private property in both names, right? Something happened to the father and passed on. The son claimed it's joint tenancy, so therefore it must come to me. Now, the siblings of this this owner or the man's other children sued the brother.
Wow.
Right? And it went to court. So it was very interesting because the court says, or the judge said that a joint tenancy between husband and wife, there is intention for title to shift to their party when one party passes away.
Okay.
Not so for other relationships. So I'm not an expert, I'm not a legal expert.
Yeah.
It's important to state or meet your lawyers and say that, look, if this is a case where you buy property with, let's say, your brother, right, and you live in it or something, to state the intention, meaning if something happens to this, how is it going to, where is title going to go? So it's very important to know all these things up front. It may not be relevant to you, but since I'm talking and there'll be different people listening to this, I thought it was important for me to just bring it up.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that, if you do not ensure all the guidelines or ground rules are set aside when you actually purchase your property, it can lead to a lot of issues down the road.
It could. And that's the danger, right? That I've met many clients along the way who are under the idea that something can be done, but have a rude awakening if something goes wrong. When nothing goes wrong, it's fine.